Okay, hello. Welcome again to my home here in New Zealand. I've actually lost count of which webinar this is, but I can tell you that this is the second webinar that we're putting on for you, the GRAID subscribers. All right, so here in New Zealand it's 8 p.m. It says here 1:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. I know that many of you are watching in India. If you're watching elsewhere, I hope that all of you are safe. If this is the first time you've watched one of these webinars, my name is Greg. I've been an English teacher for the last 15 years. I'm back here in New Zealand where I've worked for GRAID, and I've also been an IELTS tutor for the 2 years I've been back. Prior to then, I spent a lot of time, 13 years in fact, in South Korea, where I taught a lot of academic English. So academic English is the name of the game today. As you can see, we're going to focus on writing task 1. Not quite as complicated as writing task 2. And hopefully some of you may have actually seen a video on writing task 1, which I produced, which gives you an overview of how to tackle this particular type of task. Today, we're going to look at a graph. I know with writing task 1 for academic, you can basically divide them into graphs or processes, sometimes maps. This one here is a graph. I've managed to reproduce this one from the GRAID site. So perhaps some of you have done this via the GRAID site. I really hope that you can see the graph as I display it. I'm going to unveil it now. So I know that a lot of you might find it quite difficult to see some of the printing that I've done on here. If there are things that you can't see and you really want to know what it says, please send a question via the GRAID chat site. But otherwise, the keywords are in larger print. These ones here, if you can't see, they're basically just the temperatures. Maybe these are a little hard to pick up, but hopefully you can follow that this is January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, right? And we have 2 line graphs here which talk about the highs and lows of the average temperatures in Cairns, QLD is Queensland, and Hobart, TAS, Tasmania, right? So again, you might have actually done this one on the GRAID site. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to produce my own answer to this. I'm going to write it up on the board. We have Tom at the other end, and he's just reminded me that this is actually webinar 21. So thank you, Tom. So anyway, I'm going to write what I think is a good answer for this, and Tom's going to be dictating that. And at the end of the webinar, we're going to enter it into the GRAID site, see which score we get. So the actual task itself, very typical instructions for the graph type task. We're told that the graphs above, which I've just flipped over, show the average daily temperatures in Hobart and Cairns. Summarize the main information by selecting and reporting. So you may be very familiar with that term, by selecting and reporting the main features. Now I'm going to talk about what the main features are and making comparisons where relevant, right? So reporting the main features, making comparisons. Very typical instructions. Let me erase this. So if you have watched the video that I produced about writing task 1 academic, this is the overview that I suggest. Now, if you're familiar with the Barron's IELTS books, which are, I think, excellent books to help you prepare, the Barron's book actually suggests putting the overview at the end of your summary. That's possible as well. I've used all different types of books to get a better idea of the test. And I do notice that the Cambridge books suggest paraphrasing the statement and then putting your overview next before you go into your main body paragraphs. So I've started subscribing to the Cambridge way, basically because Cambridge have a large hand in producing the test. Let's start with paraphrasing the statement. So hopefully you can see that there's a similarity straight away between writing task 2 and writing task 1. Now, when I say paraphrase the statement, this is what I mean, right? So the graphs above show the average daily temperatures in Hobart and Cairns. If you don't know where Hobart and Cairns are, they are 2 cities, not major cities, but 2 cities in Australia. So I'm going to paraphrase these. Hopefully that's big enough for you to read. If it isn't, please let me know. I have my computer open, so any messages which pop up on the GRAID site, then Tom will convey them to me. Okay, so here I have paraphrased this statement. So I'll let you know what I've done here. So the name of the game obviously is paraphrasing. So this means I want to try change the statement that the examiner has given me as much as I can. Just like with writing task 2, the same idea is to demonstrate to the examiner your range of grammar and vocabulary. So yes, I know that they are graphs. I'll show you again. When we do writing task 1, academic, we might come across line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, right? So what I've done here is I have demonstrated to the examiner some extra vocabulary. I haven't just said graphs, I've labeled the type of graphs, so I've named them, right? So that is what I suggest you do as well. So always tell the examiner what type of graphs or charts you're dealing with, right? And this is one which you can use again and again. So illustrate. So quite often the examiner will use this word, show. So nice synonym, illustrate, right? So I think illustrate is the best word choice because that's exactly what graphs or charts do. Now, some of you may be mathematicians and you might say average and mean are not exactly the same thing, but I think for the purposes of this test, the meanings are close enough. Daily temperatures, quite hard to paraphrase. So I know you don't have a lot of time. I tried to do this in 20 minutes as well. So I just went with daily temperatures and got on with it. But I did add some more information, right? So to make up for using the same term, I said in degrees Celsius, which we can see right, so it tells us here temperature, and we have the degree symbol and Celsius symbol, right? So I've used words rather than the symbols. Perhaps on test day, you might want to use both. Throughout my whole response, you're going to see me using words. But what I do like here is I'm paraphrasing it, but I'm adding in extra vocabulary, again, demonstrating to the examiner that I know lots of words. And where possible, it's okay to insert some extra general knowledge as long as it's not an assumption, right? So I know for a fact that Hobart and Cairns are Australian cities, so I thought, why not just add that in? So here is my paraphrasing. Now, on test day, I'm going to use a blue pen for this. I'm going to erase this soon, but just to let you know, on test day, I would skip a line and then I would start the overview in a new paragraph, right? So essentially, my response is going to have 4 paragraphs. The paraphrasing is 1 sentence, but it's still a paragraph, right? A paragraph can just consist of 1 sentence. My overview is another paragraph. So these 2 are very short paragraphs. These are my meatier or lengthier paragraphs. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So after the first paragraph here, I skip a line. Just like writing task 2, it makes it so much easier for the examiner to identify your paragraphing if you skip a line, right? You can always ask for more paper, I believe, on test day. So why not just skip a line? So I'm going to go on to the overview now. Now, when I do this overview, I'm going to show you the graphs. So just so you know what I'm doing, I'm going to write up here. Overview, right? Let's have a look at the graph. I'll flip it back. Now, I've done a lot of work on writing task 2. And in all of the webinars that you've seen, if you have seen them, you'll hear me talk about the importance of planning. Yes, I know you only have 20 minutes, essentially, to do this answer, and then you have 40 minutes for writing task 2. But you still have to have some planning for this, right? Sorry, I haven't flipped that over. So with the overview, this is where you need to look really carefully, and your planning is, what are the 2 things that you're going to talk about? 2 main things, right? So the reason I say 2 main things is because the first thing you're going to talk about will be main body paragraph 1. Then the second main thing you're going to focus on will be main body paragraph 2. Right, so that should be your recipe. I've talked about recipes for writing task 2. That should be your recipe for writing task 1 academic. So this is the planning. You need to think really carefully what you're going to write about, because that will be your answer, right? So you need to look at the graph. This is where I think when you're practicing this at home, sometimes you might not to actually, you could actually skip the writing process and just practice analyzing graphs or charts. It's so important. It's the skill which you're being tested on, as well as your actual written product. So when I look at these 2 graphs, what strikes me, what I see immediately, is that the highs and the lows in Cairns and Hobart follow a similar pattern, right? So that's my first main point, right? So that the patterns or the variation between highs and lows are very similar, right? You can see this too. You don't need to read the temperatures, because these lines, right, the difference, the variation between highs and lows follows similar patterns in both of the cities. That's my first main point, right? Then the next thing I see is, now I'm kind of lucky because I'm quite familiar with Cairns and Hobart. So sometimes you're going to have some luck and it will be a topic that you have knowledge about. But I know that Cairns is a very hot city. It's very far north in Australia. So I can see that the high temperatures in Cairns, you know, these are in the 30s here, and the lows are even the mid-20s, right? So it says 31, 24. In winter, because this is the southern hemisphere, in winter, so June, July, the highs in winter are still 26, and the lows are 18, 17. But in Hobart, which is in Tasmania, right down the bottom of Australia, much milder weather, right? So in summer, the average highs are only 22, 21. The lows are 13, 11. In winter, the highs are only 12, and it goes as low as 5 degrees, right? So that's my next main point, is that overall, Cairns has warmer weather, right? So those are the first thing I need to think about are my two main points that I'm going to explore in my summary. And then I come up with my overview. But I don't start my overview until I'm really sure what those two things are going to be. Now, in most cases, I think the examiners design these graphs or charts so it's really obvious what those two things are. And most candidates that do well will probably pick the same two things to explore. So here is my overview. Okay, so again, that's probably about as quickly as I can write. Maybe on paper I could write faster. So even though I only have 20 minutes, once I have my ideas, then it's a matter of just writing them down quickly. So just to explain what I've got up here, always begin your overview with the cohesive device overall. So I keep talking about recipes. This should be part of your recipe for writing task 1, academic. Just begin your overview with overall, comma. Every time. There's no reason to use any other cohesive device. This signals that it's an overview. That's what the examiner is going to be looking for. Well, according to all the books that Cambridge makes. So it can be seen, right? It can be seen. The reason I do that is because we're asked via the band descriptors to use a range of different grammar. And hopefully, for all of you watching at home there, hopefully you can remember from previous webinars that this is an example of passive voice, right? And I know a lot of viewers have mentioned that passive voice in academic writing is sought after, or it's a good thing to use in academic writing. That's absolutely true. So I'm going with overall and then passive voice. And again, this is something which I think you can use in every writing task 1 summary. It can be seen. Then what's next is I have a complex sentence, it can be seen that, right? So every time I begin my summary for writing task 1 academic, it begins with this phrase. So immediately I have a good cohesive device, I have passive voice, then I'm going into a complex sentence. So hopefully that first impression to the examiner in my overview is a positive one. Now, here is the first point I made. The variation between high and low average temperatures in both cities is similar, right? I know that we're asked to make comparisons, but we have made a comparison and we've said that the variation between highs and lows is similar, right? Don't have to just talk about differences. Well, in my opinion, you don't, because that's a similarity, right? I've still compared them and I've pointed out that something is similar. So don't think that you just have to go and talk about differences. So my first main point is that the high and low, or the variation between high and low average temperatures in both cities is similar throughout the year, right? So as I pointed out before, the lines on the graphs, you can see that pattern. However, so another cohesive device, and I'm signaling my next point, and my next point is, where are we? However, the climate, right? So just want to use a more scientific word than weather. Weather is usually temporary, whereas climate is, more over a longer period of time. The climate in Cairns is, here's a collocation, considerably warmer, right? So I want to show my use of collocations, right? So in other words, this means it's a lot warmer. And here is a nice comparison using than in Hobart, right? So very clearly I've stated the two things, the two main points, which are going to be main body 1 and then main body 2. So let's move on to main body 1. Now, sorry, I should have pointed this out. If you've been trying to write this down at home, I should have told you earlier, this is being dictated by Tom. Actually, I did say that. So as well as Tom entering it into the grade site to test the score, it'll also be uploaded as an example essay onto the grade blog, right? So if you have written down the introduction and overview, it's not too much to write down, but don't feel that you have to write down main body 1, main body 2. Here is main body 1. Now, for the purposes of my example, I've tried to put in as many details as possible. My answer is actually quite long. On test day, you only need 150 words. I think mine ended up being around 200 words. It doesn't matter if it's more than 150 words, but I've just tried to demonstrate as many details as possible to help you at your end. Now, what I do with my overview, as you've seen, I identify the two things I'm going to talk about. Then with my main body 1, I paraphrase the first part, right? And then I paraphrase the second part of my overview. So you're going to see that straight away. I'm going to start with paraphrasing. And I'll put the graph up for you. So just so you know what we're on, if you're joining late, this is main body 1. In case you can't see that, Celsius is always capitalized. It's actually taken from the name of a scientist, if you didn't know. So we capitalize Celsius. You might want to use the symbol. I'm just using the word. Hopefully you can pick up the spelling. Okay, let me stop there. So, as I mentioned in my overview, the first thing that I'm going to look at is the fact that the variation between high and low in Cairns and Hobart is very similar. We can see that in the lines. So I paraphrase that idea and just start adding in more detail, right? So as you can see, there is never more than a 9 degrees Celsius and 10 degrees Celsius difference between the monthly high and low temperature in Cairns and Hobart. And this is definitely a nice expression that you can learn respectively, right? So that means when we have two things and we talk about them at the same time, we can end that sentence with the word respectively, right? So it just means we're talking about two things, right? So again, I'm repeating that main idea from the overview and I'm starting to add in my details. Obviously, the detail here is I'm putting the actual degrees difference, right? So, and this is what I'm going to explore more, right? So it's just all about details for the main body. And you're just picking out the most important details, right? There's so many details that you could talk about. Just go for the main ones. Now, I don't want to use the word Cairns or the name Cairns too much. And we know that it's in Queensland. So even with names, if you can try paraphrase them, do so. I'm going to say in the Queensland city. And I'm trying to avoid using the word temperatures too much. So again, those are those hot words that we talked about in writing task 2. There are going to be words which you're going to need to use a lot in any of the writing task 1 academic summaries. So you just need to try to think of other ways of saying them. So instead of saying temperature, I'm just going to say highs and lows, right? Because we know that we're talking about the weather. I'm just going to stop here for a second. So with the details, I'm using the information I have in front of me, right? So with the biggest, I'm talking about the biggest differences in temperature. And I'm saying in Cairns, the Queensland city, these biggest differences, so widest range is just a nice collocation. The biggest differences between highs and lows are in these months, right? So I'm just using the information from the graph. Those biggest differences occur in July, August, September, and November. Now, you can see while down here. This means that I'm about to introduce the next clause in a complex sentence. So I'm going to just erase the first sentence, right? So just remember that this is the second sentence after the blue line, just so you can see where I've continued from. This is the limitation of using a whiteboard. So while so again, variance before I use variation. So I'm just always paraphrasing. Variance is just another way of saying variation. Before I used occurs, then I used happens. So that's just my instinct, just keep paraphrasing. And hopefully that'll become your instinct as well. Happens in the Tasmanian city, right? So that information is there if you know Hobart's in Tasmania. So here is my comparison, right? So we've been asked to make comparisons, and I've said yes. The difference between the highs and lows is very similar, but now I'm going into details, and through these details, I'm making a more detailed comparison. I have another sentence or two. Again, I've made mine very long just to give you more ideas. I'm going to erase this. And a cohesive device. On the other hand, that says narrow, narrowest. Right, so I just made a point about the biggest difference between high and low. This is why I've used the cohesive device on the other hand. So now I'm going to talk about the narrowest or smallest difference, right? So I'm using expressions like narrowest range just to use a variety of vocabulary, right? So on the other hand, the narrowest range between the high and low temperatures in Cairns is 7 degrees Celsius. Right, so you can see 31, 24, 31, 24 from January through to May, right? So in May we have 27 and 20, right? So I'm picking out a couple of different details. The biggest gap between high and low temperatures and the smallest gap. And I'm doing it for both cities, right? So because I am doing it for both cities, I'm going to add in some information about Hobart. Now I'm going back to variation again. So just if you can't think of other terms, then kind of cycle through them, right? So I had variation, then variance, then I'm going back to variation. And again, instead of using temperature, I'm going highs and lows. So cycle through that vocabulary so you're not repeating the same terms one after another. Okay, just to read what I've written in case you can't see it very well. So I talked about the narrowest range between temperatures here in Cairns, which was at the end of summer and early winter. So there was a 7 degrees difference. And I'm doing the same for Hobart. And I said, Hobart experiences its lowest variation in high and lows of 8 degrees Celsius, that should be degrees, during the months of March, April, and August, right? So their smallest variation or gap between high and low is in March, where it's 18 and 10. April, 15 and, 20 and 12 in March, 18 and 10 in April. And in August, that difference is 14 and 6, right? So just using the information in front of me and talking about the details. But again, that main point is that those patterns are very similar. Then I go on to main body 2. So again, this is a very, very long main body paragraph. I've just tried to give you some more ideas. If I was running out of time on test day, I might just cut out perhaps some of this or try to condense it a bit more. But let's have a look at main body 2. So again, main body 2 is my second point, which I mentioned in the overview. And my second point from my overview is that the climate in Cairns is much warmer overall than it is in Hobart. So that's what I'm going to focus on in main body 2. Put the graph up for you. So I'm going to start off by talking about Cairns. Now, you've probably seen me, you've noticed rather that I start off with Cairns, then mention Hobart. To me, that's just obvious because on the graphs, Cairns is at the top and Hobart's at the bottom. So what I do is I start off talking about Cairns. Now, a little bit of general knowledge. I'm sure you are familiar with this term as well. Tropical climate, right? So we can see that Cairns has, warm summers, and in winter it's not even that cold, right? So they have highs of 26 in the winter months. Just remembering down here in the south, New Zealand, Australia, that winter is June, July, August, right? So even in winter, in tropical Cairns, they have highs of 26, 27. So Cairns has a tropical climate with average temperatures. So again, with average, I'm just switching between average, mean, average, mean. Average temperatures that are, so here's another complex sentence. And I'm making a comparison with my vocabulary. Cairns has a tropical climate. Hobart has a temperate climate, right? So temperate means there's a bigger difference between summer and winter. And in temperate climates, summers are not that hot, right? So we can see in Hobart that the average highs, even in summer in Australia and New Zealand is December, January, and February. So those summer months in Hobart are not really hot. 21, 22, 22. It's even a little cooler than here in New Zealand or Hamilton, where I live. So Hobart's temperature has a temperate climate, right? So I'm going to give more details, right? So summer temperatures. Now, I want to try avoid using the names Hobart and Cairns if I can. If you can't, then you just have to go with those names, but I'm just trying to mix it up. So I'm going to say in the Queensland location. So I know that because I have a dear friend from Tasmania, and I know that Hobart is the capital of Tasmania. So again, just to avoid using the name Hobart, I've referred to Hobart as the Tasmanian capital, right? So again, my comparison here is that Cairns has a tropical climate, Hobart a temperate climate, and I'm giving more details. Summer months in Cairns, 31, 31, 31, which is approximately 10 degrees higher than in Hobart, where we have 22, 22, and 21, right? So you don't have to be exact with your details. The detail here is approximately 10 degrees higher. And to wrap it up, now, a thermometer has mercury in it, or an old-fashioned one. Maybe some of you are younger than me, so you haven't seen a traditional thermometer, but the mercury is just, again, it's just some more vocabulary that I'm trying to use, bigger variety. The mercury really drops. So if you're not familiar with this expression, it means when we have a thermometer, right? So this will tell us 40 or 0, right? So this is degrees Celsius. We have the mercury. On a very hot day, it's going to get up to 40. When the mercury drops, it shows us that the temperature is getting colder, right? So that's what it means if you're not familiar with mercury dropping. So the mercury really drops below 20 degrees Celsius in Cairns. Now, I'm going to erase the first sentence. Otherwise, I'll have nowhere to write, obviously. And just so you remember, this is the continuation from the first sentence. So we're heading back up to the top. So the mercury really drops below 20 degrees Celsius in Cairns, even in winter, right? Again, winter here in New Zealand and Australia is June, July, August. So the average winter days are 18, 17, 17. So that means that it doesn't always go below 20, right? So it really drops below 20 degrees because in the daytime, it's into the 20s, right? So this is, I think, factually correct according to this graph. And another complex sentence, while the lowest mean, right? So average mean. I'm always mixing up my vocabulary. So this is an obvious comparison to make, right? Hobart in winter, 5 degrees, 6 degrees, very cold. Well, I think that's cold. And I'm just highlighting the months where it's 5 degrees. So you have to draw a limit somewhere. So I'm just talking the lowest, right? So here we go, the lowest, 5 degrees, June and July. During the months of June and July. Now I'll make this look a little neater, just so you can see where I'm finishing. So there we have it. That is approximately 200 words. Again, I have a lot of details that I've just tried to demonstrate to you. If you have attempted this Writing Task 1 academic summary on the GRAID site, maybe you had difficulty with it. So I hope what we have now is an example which is going to score 8.5 to 9. This is where I get nervous, fingers crossed, and let's wait while Tom puts in all of what he's dictated into the system. And I believe that it's going to switch over to the grade site so we can see. Okay. Oh, yes. I can see the message here from Tom. I've still got it. Thank you. So 8.5 to 9, that example will be up on the grade blog, right? So it is definitely more than 150 words. If I ran out of time, I would just cut out some of the details from main body paragraph 1. But the reason I think I did well on it when I was trying out this before is I looked at the graph and I just committed to the 2 most obvious things to talk about. And then I just wrote like a madman, right? So you can see me writing up the schedule. So on Sunday, there will be a replay. It's always at the same time. So you should know by now, I guess. It's always 1:30 Indian Standard Time. And this is for all of the webinars, the replays, the Tuesday, the Thursday webinars. That's 8 p.m. here in New Zealand. So Sunday, 1:30 Indian Standard Time. There will be a replay of an earlier webinar on grammar. If you do watch the replay at this time on Sunday, there'll be somebody that can take your questions, right? So if you've missed it, you want to watch it again and ask some questions, there'll be someone from Grade who can answer your questions on Facebook. Next Tuesday, we have the public webinar, and it's going to be writing task 2. You'll see me up on this whiteboard with a brand new essay, right? So writing task 2 next Tuesday. That's a public webinar, open to anyone. And for you, the subscriber, next Thursday, just to balance it out, this is the subscriber. I'm just going to put web for it. Actually, I'll put it down here. Subscribers webinar. It's going to be writing task 1, right, to balance it out for all of you who are preparing for the general training test. Next Thursday, we're going to look at writing a letter, right? So hopefully today was helpful for you. Please keep in touch and good luck. I hope wherever you are that you're very safe.